Hello and welcome back to a new video. I've tried to film this video this week about 5 times. I am fueled today by a RED-Scue bar. This is not a promotional video. But yeah, this week has been a really bizarre one. So last week had a brand trip because we were talking to some high rocks and Ironman events in Spain. And I grew up in Spain. If you didn't know, I actually ran for the Spanish track team. This wasn't just sat here, I was filming some videos before, but yeah, I ran for the Spanish track team and actually got reunited with all of my medals and things when I went over there. And that was really difficult to see kind of my life before relative energy deficiency in sport. And, you know, there are stories of people going back and, you know, running again at elite levels after REDs. Just for me, it wasn't something that was possible because when I tore my Achilles when I was 17, that was the only chance that I had to go on my D1 scholarship. Now I'm 22, I wouldn't be able to then go and run D1. And I was out for a year and it was just really hard to kind of like catch up and then get the times and to be able to go again. So it did dash those dreams, and that's what I'm so passionate about talking up about, like fueling enough. It's why I started RED-Scue in the whole, you know, the whole reason for starting it was because my dreams got essentially dashed and I spent my whole life dreaming about becoming a runner. So going back to Spain was difficult. It was very, very difficult to see kind of my old life and the way that training used to be, because I left 6 years ago when COVID happened and hadn't been back since. So all of my old stuff was there. So that was pretty challenging because I think there's a certain part of REDs where you spend your whole life kind of living off the external validation of other people. And what I mean by that is culture, and the culture I was in, it was always performance-led and achievement-led. And I loved that, you know, and running gave me this safe space to be able to release all of my feelings and emotions, but also be able to do something that I was very, very good at. And then to have that cut so short by REDs is very, very challenging. And I spent, you know, we talk a lot about depression and kind of the psychological impacts and cognitive impacts of underfueling, but it's also when you have not known that you've underfueled and suddenly you're massively injured. You're not just underfueled cognitively, physically, but you're also then dealing with the mental pressure of injury. And for me, I used to Google my symptoms all the time, like probably about every 20 minutes. I would try and self-diagnose. I would self-diagnose before I'd even seen a physio. I'd have to see a physio like immediately. I was chronically emotional, crying, like my whole life would be like ruined because of injury. And I've been injured from REDs 4 times. That's 2 torn meniscus on my left knee and then 2 times a torn Achilles on my right foot in the same place. So for me, my kind of weaknesses are I don't want to say weaknesses, but the parts that my body most impacted by REDs was my ligaments, so my meniscus and my Achilles. And a part that, you know, isn't talked about is that, you know, your life literally just feels like it crumbles because you're injured and you've gone from like this extreme level of fitness and output to, oh, I can't even move off of the sofa and everything hurts and I feel like the pain is like making me sick. And then you're nauseous, you don't want to eat, the cycle repeats, you've got bad gut issues, you don't want to eat, the cycle repeats. And I'm really noticing a trend of people being diagnosed as like nearly celiac. And I don't know if this nearly celiac is just because of like underfueling, because I don't know how you can be nearly celiac, because for me, I was, you know, dairy-free, FODMAP. I cut out so many foods because I had like chronic appendicitis. I had very low blood pressure. I have had REDs where I've been both extremely bloated. So the first time when I had REDs 4 years ago, it was unknowingly underfueling. My coach was very toxic at the time. I was running loads to try and meet the standards of his best athlete and to try and get my D1 scholarship. And I knew I needed to meet those times like pretty quick. There was a timeline to it. You know, it was like 6 months, get sub 440 in your 1500 meter time and get a sub 215 in your 800 meter time and like go. And after COVID, you know, when you've spent most of the time not running, that was really weird for me, because in COVID, living in Spain, you could only leave the house. You couldn't leave the house in the first, I think it was 3 months. Whereas in the UK, like, people turn to that like excessive extreme exercise. And I know a lot of people got disordered eating and kind of compulsive exercise from COVID. And I don't think many people have recovered since then. I do think that COVID triggered this whole a kind of epidemic, and we haven't seen a difference since. It's just been that the behaviours have come out in other ways. So, you know, everyone was doing Chloe Ting and YouTube videos, or cycling extreme miles or running extreme miles, because like what else was there to do during COVID? And then like coming out of COVID, I think everyone's kind of like stayed in that element of still having an element of chronic underfueling and overtraining. And I think we've seen that where the same patterns and behaviours get moved into different sports. So for me, I first had RED-S, unknowingly underfueled, tore my Achilles. I then went into triathlon. Even though I was really struggling the first time, I had appendicitis. I ended up in the hospital. They thought I had appendicitis, and it was just awful. It was awful, and no one realised the extent to how bad it was. But it was the type of RED-S where I was like super bloated because my body was so stressed. My cortisol was like through the roof, so was my thyroid. I had so many spots. I felt like I had no brain capacity. Like, it was so foggy. Like, I felt like I was walking through mud a lot of the time. I'd forget like normal things in my daily routine. I'd forget like appointments, hair appointments, teeth appointments. I'd forget so much, and it's because I'd been sitting my A-levels at the same time, and just the chronic stress was so bad. And the issue in society is that, a bit like with like one race on the Olympic stage, a bit like, you know, one test at school, it breeds so much pressure, and that's not relieved. The pressure just keeps building and it gets shifted elsewhere, a little bit like where the sport gets shifted elsewhere. So the pressure might go from A-levels, high school, to then college, to then uni, to then the working world. And suddenly you're in a 9 to 5 thinking, how did I get here? And that was me. I just moved from high pressure environment to high pressure environment to high pressure environment because I thought that was where I thrived. And I'm not saying I just learned how to thrive in those environments because that was what was expected of me. And that's what RED-S brings. It brings that competitive aspect. You want to, you know, you might have come from that kind of competitor environment. And I think that's why a lot of 9 to 5 professional people go into the world of high rocks, go into the world of Ironman training, endurance sports, because it's a way of that competitiveness and that, you know, that thriving, that wanting to perform in high pressure environments outside of normal work. But the thing is when you're working extremely hard and you're competing or training extremely hard at the same time, that is literally the part where RED-S is going to be so common, because when you're working and trying to do training full time and all the travel, that is where those energy gaps really, really happen. And the second time I had RED-S, it wasn't knowingly, but there was definitely an element where I was trying to actively lose weight because it was a coping mechanism. So I had done a year abroad in the US, and while I was there, I was quite unhappy. And instead of wanting to admit what I saw as like a failure, I stubbornly said I will stay there. I will stay there, and the way that I will manage to get through it is by throwing myself into more sport and restriction mindset. And so for me, I started to control what I could control in a country that was foreign and unknown to me. And so I started to control the food I ate, and I started to control the amount of sport I did, and it just turned into so much control and obsession, and I fell into that red cycle again. But it was knowingly this time. Like, I knew that what I was doing was a form or a way to cope. But then when I tried to express how I'd felt in America, I almost didn't have the words for it. And I have been tested, and I am being in the process of testing for ADHD. ADHD is a form of both autism and ADHD. And some of the kind of patterns and behaviors that I always thought were my fault, and I always saw as like personal character flaws, like I get very obsessed with things, with hobbies, with very niche projects. I guess RED-Scue and relative energy deficiency in sport has now become a very much niche area of research that I'm interested in. And that is something growing up that I always showed. I actually, when I was growing up, didn't speak for the first couple years of my life, and I had to go to speech therapy. And now but I was always also a very impulsive kid. I've cracked my head open 3 times from just silly stuff. But at school, I was always, the one who was trying to high function, high perform all the time, whether that was in sport and whether that was in academics. The sport just came kind of naturally to me, and it was what I loved and enjoyed. But you almost couldn't grow up. It was that environment where you couldn't grow up just being good at sport, because it's you need a plan B. But recently, when I've been looking at ADHD, I was actually recommended to have a look at getting tested, because there's quite, a stigma of talking about these, the type of neurodivergence and neurodiversities in the environment that I'm in. And then I was looking at, I always struggled growing up with sport was always my way of making friends, and anything outside of that, it was always, I think I come across as quite an intense, serious person, and so sport was always that barrier to break down communication. And so when I didn't have the words for REDs, I couldn't do the sports that I loved, and I was stuck in that injury cycle. The stress, just more stress came out of my body, because I didn't have the words to be able to express how I was feeling, and I didn't know about REDs the first time. And so RED-Scue and starting it is also to be able to give people those words, because a lot of people, when they get that diagnosis or they almost have the name for a condition that they've been experiencing, it brings so much validation. And you feel seen. You really, really do. You're suddenly I have words and vocabulary for something I thought was my fault for my whole life. And that can feel really, for some people it might feel oh no, I've got so much to change now. I definitely felt that at the beginning. I was I've got so much to work on. I've got so much to change in my life. I like my life. I like that I do, 20 plus hours of sport a week, because that's how I make friends and that's who I am. And it's the hardest thing for me in my journey in recovery from REDs. And I had a flare-up of an injury about 3 weeks ago, which was my left meniscus again, because I'd gone back to cycling. And the part of it is that even though I had my last bout of REDs 2 years ago, it comes back to get you, because that injury does flare up occasionally, and it's when I'm in I've either done too much or I'm in an element of a very stressful situation, and I haven't talked through the stress, and I haven't recognized that my body is under stress that isn't sport related. And coming back, when I had this flare up, it was the first time that I haven't rushed to grab a gym pass, to grab a swim pass, to over rehab. The first time And I've had REDs twice and been in recovery from it and recovered from it twice. But it was the first time that I didn't freak out. And for me, I've had a lot of poor mental health in relationship to underfueling, REDs, control around food, exercise. And it was really unbelievable because the recovery was so much quicker. The recovery process was so quick because I rested, and my whole day, I didn't research, I didn't self-diagnose. I guess there was an element where I knew what the injury was because I had a meniscus tear before. So I knew it was in the same area. So there was some reassurance in that. But I actually didn't seek physio help immediately because I had gone through it before. And there's a certain element with REDs that, like, as hard and as challenging and as difficult as it is, you come out of it. Honestly, like, I can really appreciate now how strong I am, how resilient I am. And there's a part of me that I saw this injury as like, okay, I might have an injury, but that doesn't mean the rest of my day and my life will be ruined. And it's taken 4 injuries to get there, 5 if you count this one. But it felt for the first time that there was a detachment in my identity where this didn't feel like a major flaw and fault of mine. And that was massive for me. And I think there was an element where learning about ADHD and learning about the fact that things like hyperfixation with work and hyperfixation with food and hyperfixation with exercise and training and not having the words to be able to express a lot of that and forgetting to eat because I'm overworking, knowing suddenly that some of these behaviours and patterns might just be the workings of my brain and not be like a personal flaw or a personal weakness, which is how I guess maybe I'd framed it myself or how it had been framed in the past, was just gave me so much vocab, so many words and so much validation in my own experience. And the fact that, yeah, I got through this. I got through REDs both of the times. I got through it even in the culture. And in the last 6 years, the culture and narrative hasn't shifted. It's been COVID, skinny talk, TikTok started that whole pattern in COVID. And you have the type of athletes and people who speak out about it. And like, thank you for them. But still, you know, ultra high protein, keto, I mean, ketosis and the GLP-1 and the ketogenic diet has been the fad. And now it's turning into protein maxing and fiber maxing. And I'm just like, get some carbs. Please get some carbs. But I think it's recognizing that in your life, who can you surround yourself with who makes you feel safe and makes you feel that you can recover? What environments can you put yourself in that make you feel like you can recover? What can you absorb and retain where you feel like you can recover? Because for me, initially, I needed to eat with someone else, or I needed someone else to cook for me because I wouldn't cook for myself. I don't know what it was in REDs. I kind of lost that ability to look after myself. I could look after the house, but I couldn't look after myself. I could go to work, I could function, I could fuel, I was functioning well at work, but it was running on like that buzzy survival energy. So I actually moved job. I completely moved job. I moved away from the city to be back by the sea. I stopped a 9 to 5 job that I traditionally thought I needed to have to be successful in society and started doing more, well, RED-Scue and freelance work, part-time tutoring, part-time translation work. Remote work really helped for me. I found the office environment very challenging as an ADHD person, but also as someone who struggles with small talk and compliments and how you dress being like a defining feature. I'm just like the type of person where I could wear gym clothes and be fine. And I just found all of that environment very challenging. I was living with 5 other people in a house, and it was just so much. And I thought, again, like America, I'm going to stick it out, even though I was not happy. And so coming back, I was really sad because I felt like a letdown and a failure that I hadn't succeeded in a 9 to 5 job. And actually, recently, and after I got this kind of recent flare of my injury, I've come back to this point of what makes me happy. What can I do that will bring some enjoyment back into my life? Because I always used to answer it with, yeah, sport makes me happy. Sport makes me happy. Sports makes me happy. But it was harming me, and the habits I was doing was harming me. And when you realize that, you're almost like, I mean, I felt for so long that I was masking and performing and pretending that I was somebody that I wasn't, because sport to me was everything, and without sport I didn't feel like I was the person that I wanted to be or that I could be. And so there is an element when you're coming out of RED-S and you're learning that the behaviours that you used to love and the behaviours that you did were really harmful to you. It does feel like masking and performance, because, you know, the person with RED-S was the person that you were, you know, everything depended on sport, everything revolved around sport. You're angry now, you're sad, there's despair, there's grief because you're not that same person. And you do make a new person. And for me, there's been a lot of trying to reduce my anger, because I used to do a lot of angry sports as well. I call them angry sports, but like I'd go out and like do like the hardest workout I could ever do. I'd be like listening to like the most aggressive music in my ears. I'd cycle like crazy amounts of miles. I'd run by like pounding. It was never just like a chill run. And so now I'm trying to embrace that flexibility of like, okay, well, if I manage to fit a cycle into my day, or if I manage to go for a walk, like I'm going to do that, but it must be something that I enjoy. I come back not feeling knackered for the rest of the day, and be something that brings me happiness. Is it in a place that brings me happiness? Is it in a weather that brings me happiness? And learning that in RED-S has been the biggest recent learning lesson, I'd say. And I don't know if it's because I'm feeling a bit better because the weather's getting nicer, so I can spend some time outside in nature. But I used to hate summer. I used to literally hate summer because when I was injured, because I'd be like, oh, actually, when I wasn't injured as well, because I'd think I have to go out and train for the 8 hours that it's sunny in the day. Otherwise, the day hasn't been optimized. And that shift, being able to appreciate summer just for the fact that I can sit outside and sit in the sun and not feel like I need to go out and train, has been the biggest learning curve, and something that I'm very proud of myself for. So wherever you are in your RED-S recovery, wherever you are in injury or in life, just know that even if you are at the darkest times, it does get better. It does. It's just about taking it step by step, day by day. What makes you happy? What's the one thing you can do today that can bring you a little bit of happiness? Who can you hang out with that will bring you happiness? What can you do to ask someone to do something for you that will help you? Whether that's take you for a coffee, cook for you, walk with you, call you, FaceTime you. What can you do that will bring an element of peace, safety, happiness, love, joy to your day? Because if you can do that one thing and keep doing it every day that isn't like sports related and isn't going to harm you, that those little steps add up. They're called micro joys and they're called glimmers, and they all add up to something better and bigger. And life after RED-S is so possible. It might take years and there will be setbacks along the way, like my flare up, but it's not about what comes afterwards. It's how do I deal with it, and how do I know that I've dealt with it before and I know I can deal with it again. So, bit of a ramble, but I will see you in the next video, and keep fueling while you're at it.